Forgettable characters. Every game has them, where after a while you realize once again that, yep, that person exists, and then you'll probably continue on with your day as though nothing was different. Characters who might have been interesting when the game was new, but haven't been relevant in the story or maybe even the gameplay for a very long time. Don't Starve Together is one such game, and Willow is one such character. When Don't Starve Not Together was the only entry in the series, Willow was the first unlockable character, added to your roster after collecting a small amount of XP, given to the player upon death, dependent on the number of days survived. As a new player to Don't Starve, it's extremely likely the first thing you died to was the darkness. One of Don't Starve's most infamous game rules is that players without an active light source will get killed by a mysterious force should they linger in darkened areas for too long. This is where, as a new player, the game reared its head and kind of let you know it wouldn't be messing around. Maxwell also seems to bait you into not worrying about the dark. He implies that food should be your top priority, as the game's title might suggest, whereas realistically, food isn't very important on day one. And if he actually wanted to help you, he'd tell you to make a torch come nighttime. This solidifies his position as the game's villain, as it sows mistrust into the player's mind and associates Maxwell with trickery and deception. Okay, before this devolves into a video essay about storytelling or something, let's get back to Willow. Once you unlocked her, Willow would provide a complete and total solution to one of the problems you'd be experiencing as a new player: darkness. Her lighter, although it was only about as bright as a gifted child once they graduated high school, would render you almost completely immune to the negative effects of the dark, at least directly. And although you were still susceptible to sneak attacks from hostile mobs outside your pitiful view radius, it did mean you couldn't get your throat slit by the ever-present Gru, especially since with its infinite durability and immunity to being stolen or deleted, it would pretty much always be alongside you in your journey for survival. However, players would oftentimes move on from Willow due to her destructive drawback, her tendency to spontaneously light fires while insane. This is a downside which, needless to say, led to a lot of combustion-related problems. Although managing sanity as Willow is slightly easier than normal, she could still be quite destructive towards personal property if players accidentally let her sanity slip below the surprisingly high threshold governing her desire for spontaneous arson. As such, Willow was a valuable stepping stone in many players of the original game's journey. Many players fondly look back onto the aid she lent to their progression through the first game. So in Don't Starve Together, Willow must still be a key part of the game. Right? Right? Wait, people still actually play this character, right? No, not really. But why? Well, there's a number of reasons. Unlike many other DST characters, Willow isn't some mythical creature or a human with crazy reality-bending powers. She just likes fires and has a giant teddy bear, for some reason. As we've seen many times before, newer players have a tendency to pick more outlandish character designs, like Weber. Willow doesn't have anything that jumps out to new players, which would be fine, if not for her lack of appeal towards experienced players either. This point is a bit more subjective than the other two, but hopefully it still makes for some good chin-wagging. Don't Starve Together doesn't have a progression system anymore, outside of the few exceptions that are the DLC characters. This means that players aren't slowly drip-fed the characters of the game one by one. Everything is now rudely shoved in their face at once. As such, Willow now serves no purpose in this regard, so the devs had an incentive to introduce a new role for her to fulfill. Spoiler alert, but Willow doesn't really have a gameplay niche that she actually fulfills. Like, at all. In and of itself, Pyromaniac isn't exactly a role in gameplay, something that Willow's unique multiple rework updates should probably have rectified, but they didn't. Now she sits in some kind of weird limbo state, not serving a gameplay role or even much of a playstyle, instead having a random mishmash of abilities, seemingly for the sake of it. So let's just jump right in and find out why Willow is Don't Starve's most forgotten character. It's an observed phenomenon in DST servers that players tend to pick the characters that have the most outward appeal. Crazy people with mind-bending powers, weird robots, cool monsters, you name it. And although Willow is crazy, she doesn't have mind-bending powers. Yet. This is a pretty surface-level explanation as to why Willow might not be picked as much amongst new players. And although it's sort of unimportant, hopefully the whole lack of mind-bending powers thing might be rectified someday. DST doesn't have a meta progression system, aside from spool-locked characters. Aside from that, and skins, everything you can unlock is done so within the game environment itself, i.e. by crafting a new weapon. So, obviously this meant that Willow wouldn't have a specific purpose to serve, that is, guiding new players through one difficulty that they'll face, while making another danger more prevalent. So, what new abilities and playstyle did she receive instead? Well, when DST was first a thing, before the official character reworks, Willow was extremely uninteresting by basically any metric. Her lighter had been reworked into a crappier version that actually broke down over time, and had to be rebuilt once it broke. However, Willow could use it to cook food, an ability not present in the base game, and I guess also give lighters to other players if for whatever reason they wanted to have a light source smaller than a torch. Her infamous downside was, of course, axed, and replaced with a new drawback in which she would freeze on low sanity. This was, I guess, an attempt at keeping the sanity being dangerous thing, but in reality it was an extremely unfun ability, since you'd always need to be near a fire while farming for nightmare fuel. And finally, Willow's 100% immunity to fire was removed and replaced with extra fire resistance, a stat that dictates how long a character can be next to an exposed fire before taking damage. This last change was arguably the most infuriating to the community, and definitely the most pointless. Having fire immunity is, at the end of the day, a niche ability, and it most certainly wasn't overpowered or anything. So, in short, new DST Willow was pretty much a nothing character. No abilities worth mentioning, plus several strange and unjustified nerfs to things that really didn't need it. It's still not 100% clear why Clay actually made these changes when DST rolled out. Whether it was a half-assed attempt at quelling griefers or something, I really don't know. But eventually Willow's actual rework would grace DST. Willow's was the second rework ever, because the character who came before her somehow needed it even more. Winona back then was even more of a nobody, sporting A, duct tape, and B, the ability to complain and get hungry once she crafted anything. Whoopee. After that, Willow was next on the docket. What mystical features did she receive in her ever-anticipated rework? Drumroll, please. Why, none other than no fire immunity, a giant teddy bear, and resistance to overheating. Oof, tough crowd. Needless to say, this update was a little bit disappointing. After plenty of nagging from the community, Willow eventually did receive complete fire immunity back, but even so, her other abilities left a lot to be desired. And still do, if you ask me.
Hey, I made a mod character. It's on the workshop. You should check it out and play it. Links in the usual places.
Nowadays, Willow's main perk is Bernie, her stuffed bear who gets real angry when Willow is insane, kills stuff for a bit, and then shrinks back down. Not that Bernie is a bad item or anything, but he is a very odd thing to design as Willow's main perk. Inherently, being a pyromanic doesn't have a lot to do with being insane, apart from pyromanics usually stereotyped as being mentally ill. So needless to say, it's strange that Willow's oversized plush Ursud is her dominant perk, even versus her firebending abilities. That being said, I do like the idea of Willow's childhood toy playing some kind of a role in her kit, apart from the disturbing noises that he makes, as he's been present in her character select portrait ever since the solo game released. It's just the decision to make him her biggest ability that strikes me as odd. Thematics of Bernie aside, making him Willow's primary ability is also odd because it technically makes her a minion character. Now, don't get me wrong, summoning stuff is fun, especially when it can take a load off the long list of survival-related chores you've got to do. Hence why Maxwell is one of my favorites. And in a vacuum, Bernie is a perfectly fine summoning-related ability. He's an excellent tool for taking care of shadow creatures, allowing you to continually stay insane with little fear of being bested by the shadows. It's just the fact that Willow's in-game abilities now revolve around the summoning of another being. DST already has its fair share of minion characters. Maxwell and Wendy are obvious candidates, but Weber and Winona, to an extent, can also be considered to be dependent on other mobs to deal damage. Basically, being a minion summoner is old hat. Furthermore, Willow being this type of character puts her in direct competition with the likes of Maxwell and Wendy, characters who are favorites amongst fans for their complex minion-based playstyles, especially post-rework. As previously discussed, Willow's rework was one of the first, and as such, lacks a bit of depth compared to some of the later ones. Thus, the depth and complexity of her minion summoning abilities pale in comparison to the game's dedicated conjurers themselves. But aside from that, there isn't really a need for another character revolving around minions in the game. If you truly want to let a swarm of lesser beings do your bidding for you, there are plenty of aforementioned characters who can easily fulfill that desire. And for the record, no, I'm not saying that Bernie should be deleted, but rather that Willow's main perk should be something more cohesive with her character and backstory. I don't mind Bernie's existence as a perk, and besides, erasing aspects of the game isn't something that Clay usually does. Often. In an ideal world, Willow's perks would actually revolve around her established affinity with fire. And yeah, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that Clay should just embrace that there's some kind of a wizard did it magic type nonsense going on here. Many official sources say that Willow merely has an affinity or liking for fire, but I think giving her an actual magical ability involving fire will permit more creative room when designing perks. I mean, come on, you're really telling me she just happened to survive this entire ass on fire orphanage? Nah, man, there's some kind of magic going on here, or plot armor or something. So she's a pyrokinetic. Now what? Well, fire-based combat abilities are a great start, but these do come with the obvious caveat of collateral damage. This is probably the most likely reason as to why Clay has shied away from adding any fire-related fighting powers as of current day. Fire comes with the foreseeable drawback of setting other things on fire, which set other things on fire,
which set other things on fire, which set other things on fire, which set other things on fire.
This means that the probability of snowballing destruction, unintended or otherwise, is greater than 0. The biggest reason why this is a concern is because it can negatively affect other players' experience playing DST. If you're on a team with a bad Willow player possessing pyrokinetic abilities, why should you get punished by her bad performance, regardless of ill intent? Obviously, this is all hypothetical, but it's something worth considering. You might not know that Wickerbottom has a book called Pyrokinetics Explained, and it does something quite interesting, absorbing all nearby fires and storing them as an item called a fiery pen, which Wickerbottom can then use as a fire staff in combat. This book is not very good. Extinguishing fires in a radius is extremely niche, and even then the ice staff does a similar enough job, alongside being much more readily available. Fire staves, or fiery pens, are extremely risky abilities to use, not providing much benefit for the cost of burning any loot of whatever you might happen to kill. This is another major problem with fire damage. Anything that's not food will get consumed by the flames, replacing it with ash. On the bright side, food items do get cooked, but that doesn't make up for potentially losing valuable resources. Oh, and fire damage also just takes a fucking eon to kill anything. Okay, I'm starting to see why Clay may have avoided adding fire abilities now. Giving Willow some kind of ability that can absorb fire for some sort of benefit, and or prevent loot from being burnt on death, would be the key to making her a true pyromancer. This could either be done via passive abilities or some item, maybe even an existing one like her lighter. If you've ever played Team Fortress 2, you might have heard of this gun called the Man Melter. It's a secondary for the Pyro and operates off a similar concept as Wickerbottom's Pyrokinetics Explained. Right-clicking will extinguish your teammates and store a critical hit for your next shot. You can store multiple crits and unleash a barrage of triple damage hell upon your enemies. In practice, this weapon isn't very good for reasons that I won't get into here, but the core concept is there. Back to Don't Starve, this idea of absorbing fire and using it to buff future casts is quite fun. Out of combat, this could lead to Willow players intentionally setting things on fire and then absorbing the residual flames, something which I think fits Willow's personality somewhat. It'd also be, of course, a useful emergency tool in the advent of a stray firehound dying in the middle of your base. But that leaves a couple questions. What fire-based abilities would Willow actually possess that could be buffed by this hypothetical charge ability? Well, I don't know. This is all theoretical, of course, but there are so many games that have cool fire-based abilities, I'm sure that Clay could think of something. Some things that would be neat to see are damage over time powers. DOT is something that isn't really common in Don't Starve, and this could actually make a unique combat niche for Willow to control. Pair that with the obvious crowd control aspect that fire is usually associated with, and there you go. Fire damage as it is right now is basically completely useless. Having the Pyromaniac character not inflict some kind of improved fire debuff is just a missed opportunity. Something that would also be neat is fire-related buffs. This is an aspect of pyromanic abilities that aren't touched on super often in video games, but can be quite interesting. The Divinity series, particularly Divinity Original Sin 1, has a number of fire-related buffs obtained from the pyrokinetic tree, ranging from speed boosts, to blinding targets with fire, to creating smoke clouds, and purging negative debuffs with the power of flames. This sort of thing would be very fitting for Willow in my opinion, and could serve to give her some more combat utility. At the end of the day, my suggestions aren't that important. What matters, from my point of view, is making Willow the premier fire-wielding character. Give her powerful, cool, fun, and usable fire-centric abilities in combat, and I'll be chuffed. Her existing fire-related perks, like increased fuel efficiency, her lighter, and sanity from fire can certainly remain. But IMHO, she also needs a downside to really hammer home a fire-oriented playstyle. Blah blah blah. Downsides are important, you know the dealio by now. Willow's current drawback of being damaged more by freezing and having insulating items be less effective is quite uninteresting, especially because outside of winter it does nothing. So what's something that would affect Willow all throughout the game and revolutionize her playstyle? Well, It all depends how much this imaginary update were to lean into her use of fire as an offensive ability. If we really wanted to go hard, limiting Willow's capabilities with non-fiery weapons could do a decent job of making her horrifically fire dependent. Or a unique list of debuffs to her various capabilities when she hasn't absorbed fire, like we discussed before, for a while. Specifics aside, the most important thing that a downside would need to do is shape Willow's playstyle into something unique. Couple this with a brand new take on combat, complete with damage over time and crowd control abilities, and you have a brand spanking new Willow, this time with actual fire powers. The only thing left to consider is whether or not Clay will actually ever do reworks. Although that sounds stupid on paper, there are a small minority of characters who do need them in my opinion. Mostly the ones who got the earliest reworks, seeing as the quality of character updates drastically improved past the first few. In my opinion, this would be a good decision to make to ensure the quality of all characters is up to the same standard. There are a few problems with this, of course, namely a treadmill problem it would likely perpetuate. Clay's work would never be over if they were to repeatedly revisit imperfect characters. However, I think a line in the sand can be drawn as to when a character is of sufficient quality. By putting earlier reworks next to newer ones, a clear disparity can be seen. After the first few, the quality drastically begins to ramp up. Something also worth noting is that Clay is revisiting seemingly every character in order to give them a skill tree, most recently Wormwood, Woody, and Wolfgang. With any luck, the stars might just align. Maybe we'll see Willow's skill tree reinvigorate aspects of her character that are lacking and actually make pyromancy the focus of her character. All things considered, a skill tree basically is a mini rework, going off the amount of content that the Wolfgang, Woody, and Wormwood trees brought to their respective characters. People are now approaching how they play these three characters completely differently, especially in the case of Woody, and I think something of this caliber would be perfect for Willow. Who knows, maybe her abilities before she unlocks any nodes on her tree will be changed as well, or maybe that's just wishful thinking. Look, whatever happens, I'm sure that Don't Starve's most forgotten character will be Winona instead. Hey, thanks for watching. If you didn't know, I recently published a mod character for DST. Go and check it out if you like the idea of finding old buried crap and then turning it into cool abilities. Wacko. Links in the usual places. But aside from that, that's all I have planned for today. So be sure to leave a comment with your thoughts on this video and your opinions on the current state of Willow. Is she a forgotten character with plenty of missed opportunity, or something else entirely? Whatever the answer, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.